To say that we enjoyed some success would be a massive understatement. At over 100 million units sold, it's still considered one of the best-selling consoles of all time. However, success comes with a price, as it is filled with what is called shovelware. As a result, very few games actually make use of the Wii's hardware capabilities and tend to look far worse than it can really dish out. It even contributed to the Wii having a bit of a reputation as being more underpowered than it really was. Enter 2009, where one company named High Voltage Software would attempt to rectify that, but how good do they do really? Let's all find out together as I review the Conduit for the Nintendo Wii.
Evacuate from so ordered. Otherwise, stay in your homes. Lock your doors and do not look out your windows.
Okay, so gameplay-wise, the Conduit isn't the most exciting game ever. It's a pretty standard first-person shooter for the most part. It has a more modern FPS style, at least at the time, so there's a 2-weapon limit, and after the first level your health regenerates. You even get grenades to throw at ammo boxes here and there to replenish ammo of a certain type. The game has 3 basic types of weapons for you to choose from. You have human weapons, which are basically weapons you'd expect to find in the real world. So basically shotguns, rifles, pistols, all that fun stuff. The most satisfying for me are the shotgun and the SCAR, the former because duh, shotguns are awesome, and the latter because it comes with a scope and actually does a decent amount of damage. Trust weapons are weapons from the Trust. They're basically the sci-fi guns like energy weapons and the like. The De-Atomizer MK4 is the MVP here, having a charge shot that seems to fire widely, but it can circle around a single target to finish them off. Then you've got drudge weapons, which are basically the alien weapons here. They're always organic in nature, so think the Hive Hand on Half-Life. The containers to fill them up are a standard case on the ground, a sort of sci-fi cooler, and a fleshy kind of growth respectively. Of all the weapons, I think I enjoyed the drudge weapons the most due to how unique they are. Also helps that the striker rifle could be charged up, effectively making it a sniper rifle, even if my aim was pretty bad. There were also some secret weapons, but I don't really classify them as their own category. They were basically just souped-up versions of existing weapons with limited ammo supply. Having played the game natively before, I can say the Wiimote controls function well enough for what they are. When I Let's Played it, of course, you can see it here. I opted for keyboard and mouse, but it works just as well on native controls. It's a good thing, too, because the game takes a sudden difficulty spike in the final section of the game, and less than stellar controls would have made it all the more frustrating. As it is, the final mission of the game certainly doesn't make it easy on you. You have to escape during a timer while using the ASE on stasis pods that each have a strong drudge in them. I pretty much gave up on any notion of trying to fight them and just ran as much as I could. The enemies are all of the same types as the weapons, so human soldiers, trust agents, and drudge aliens. Human soldiers are almost hilariously ineffective for the most part. That's not to say they can't wear you down, especially in the initial level where you don't regenerate lost health. Trust agents pack significantly harder firepower and are basically the crux of the final section being so difficult, but they're not much harder to take down. Drudge have the highest variety of the enemy types. You've got weak little ones you can literally just punch dead, but they tend to spawn from hatchers. The red variants, though, that I've dubbed roly-polies, like to blow up on you. Then you've got medics with a charge shot, larger drudge soldiers, and big behemoths. That's not even getting into invaders, which are basically mini-bosses that can really take a punch. And that's not even to mention the flying bugs and invisible drudge. In addition to the aforementioned hatchers, larger drudge will appear in conduits, aka portals you have to destroy. And as if all that still wasn't enough, you have ghost mines to contend with every now and then. Basically, they sit there waiting to explode on you. You have no choice but to use the ASE to induce an explosion if you don't want to end up dead on the ground, which leaves you vulnerable all the while. The one mercy is that you can still kind of see them without the ASI, and it will also cause your ASI to beep like crazy when you're near one. It's still a complete hassle to deal with, especially in areas where you're already having to deal with other enemies. Being able to make them explode with conventional weapons would have made it a lot better, or at the very least grenades. I get that it's there to give you another reason to use the ASE, but it's probably the weakest part of the game from a gameplay perspective. The main crux of the game, of course, is the ASE. It's short for the All-Seeing Eye. Illuminati jokes aside, while not quite the scan visor from Metroid Prime, the game will get plenty of use out of it. You scan terminals to make things happen, scan ghost mines as I already mentioned, and you can also use a wayfinder with it. Not that you really need it too badly, since the game is fairly linear. You'll also find yourself using the ASC to find and scan nodes to pop alien doors to proceed. You can also sort of use it in combat because the invisible drudges have to be scanned to deactivate their cloak. It seems only then can you actually deal with them. Overall, I would have liked the ASC to have more optional roles like maybe scanning enemies for weaknesses. As is, the only thing optional you can do with it is scanning collectible discs, finding secrets, and the aforementioned scanning nothing to get a sort of GPS, but it was still a pretty good mechanic. Overall, the gameplay is pretty good. The game takes a pretty big difficulty spike in the final area, the ghost mines are pretty annoying and the controls don't always hit the mark, but it's fine for what it is. When things are clicking, it's a pretty fun, more linear-styled shooter, definitely feeling like shooters around the time. If nothing else, at least the ASC and more insectoid weapons give it enough of a distinct style so it doesn't just feel like another shooter. There's no doubt, though, that a lot of that had to do with the lack of competition, since while games like Call of Duty made it on Wii, not many hardcore shooters were made with the system in mind. I'd say give it a whirl, even if its significance has waned slightly over the years. Similarly to the gameplay, the plot isn't the most unique in the world. It's a government conspiracy / alien invasion story where you start out later on in the story before it flashes back. You'll notice that the first level has a very different person talking to you than in the following level, and it quickly becomes apparent why. This happens early on, so it's not too much of a spoiler, but spoiler warning just in case. The guy tasking you at the beginning of the second level quickly betrays you before the level's even over, and the other guy he told you was bad, Prometheus, ends up bailing you out. When you hear his voice, it becomes immediately apparent what's going on since you would recognize him from the first level. From there, it's basically a struggle to try to save the US government from completely collapsing to alien forces. However, this proves very difficult as Mr. Adams, the guy who backstabbed you, seems to have contingency plans for everything. My favorite part, though, is Mr. Adams keeps trying to convince you to join him after he just tried to kill you. Mr. Ford, I know I tried to kill you the last time you worked for me willingly, but I totally pinky promise I won't do it again. This comes to a head where, in going back to the events of the first level, you head into a massive conduit to take it out from the inside. I won't spoil what you see next, since that's actually late game, but let's just say you learn the truth about the nature of Prometheus. Prometheus even has a similar moment as Vega from Doom 2016, except this came first. Mr. Adams talks to his superiors on how to proceed, and the game is over. Anyone who knows the story of Prometheus can probably sort of see the twist coming, but it was still pretty good nonetheless. As I said, the gameplay and plot are pretty similar with my opinion on them. What I mean is they're not great, but they're pretty good. It's not going to blow your socks off with depth, but at least there's enough care in the plot that it kept my attention overall. At its worst, it's a typical action movie where you must save the world from some overwhelming alien threat. Throw in some good old government conspiracy theories and you got the basic idea. The deepest it gets is you quickly getting betrayed and then spending the rest of the game trying to stop the backstabber. Too long, didn't read, the plot's fine, moving on now. This is probably the most interesting part of the review, since it's what High Voltage Software was so very proud of. They were proud of the tech demo that they used to show off the engine, and even did a tech highlight demo to show off the effects in the game itself. The question is, does it hold up? Well, I'd say mostly. I applaud them for their efforts, and it's certainly one of the better looking games on the Wii overall. There's a lot of love and care into everything, especially the visual effects. There's reflections and refractions in water, depth of field takes play when you use a scope or reload a weapon, many wall textures have Source Engine style detail textures when you look at them up close. In 1080p, I can really appreciate how much polish was placed into everything, and the environments themselves are varied enough to not get too stale. From the libraries of Congress to a hellish looking street or a slick tech lab, you won't be looking at exactly the same thing for too long. It should also be worth noting that the enemies cast basic shadows. It's nothing too mind-blowing since they're just static shadows, but I do appreciate when some care is given to shading, since lighting, in my opinion, can make or break a presentation. Humans look alright, but they also tend to look mostly obscured. While you do see Michael Ford, the titular character on the box art, John Adams is mostly covered in shadow. Likewise, there are trust agents whose faces you can sort of see, but they're wearing gas masks and eyewear. Then you've got the puppet soldiers wearing all combat armor. If I had to guess, the human faces being obscured like this helped with the Wii's limitations. Human faces are certainly the hardest thing to get right, I would imagine. The droids themselves are naturally going to have the more interesting designs, being the aliens from the game. As mentioned in the gameplay, they have some variances, and the same is reflected in their designs too. The smaller enemies are depicted sort of like tricksters, animation and voices and all, while the beefier drudge act like foot soldiers. And of course the invaders act like giant imposing insects. It isn't the most amazing variety ever, since you'll still be fighting copies of the same looking aliens over and over, but at least it never gets too stale. The voice acting is pretty good too, mostly. The main character Ford isn't anything to write home about, but Prometheus and Mr. Adams have some pretty fitting voices. You can really tell that Mr. Adams at least wants you to believe that he believes he's doing the right thing, and Prometheus has a buttery smooth voice. This is good since you'll be listening to Prometheus the most throughout the game. He really has that trustable voice. As mentioned before, the Drudge sort of have voices for grunts and things like that, and it really makes the smaller enemies come across as mischievous, even as they're trying to kill you. The Conduit overall has some pretty good music going on too. It's fairly subdued most of the time, but it really thumps when it has to. The title music in particular is a really great suspenseful piece. You would know because you're currently listening to it right now. The sound effects are my usual brand of alright. That being said, the ASE has a nice hum to it and the weapons sound punchy enough, especially the human weapons like the Scar and shotgun. The ASE beeping at least helps you determine things like notes to open a door or ghost mines that are about to blow your face off. Overall, the presentation is mostly fairly good. It's obvious that this was the main focus on High Voltage Software's part, to make a game that can look good on the Wii. I have to give them props though, it looks pretty good even in 1080p. The most I'll say about it is that it's pretty obvious they had to make some concessions to get out on the system. It was pretty obvious even in 480p that the background environments like outside of Windows are laughably low res, even sometimes just a flat image. I can let it slide though, since the rest of the game is as polished as it is. It may not have one of the better aesthetics overall, and I would say Metroid Prime 3 is still what I deem the best looking Wii game. I have to give HVS credit. With a tidal wave of shovelware on the Wii that would have looked bad on the PS2, it's nice to see someone actually tried.
I'm in a firing on you. What the hell is going on here? If these men are attacking you, they must be working for Prometheus, and you'll have to eliminate them.
Pretty good is where I'd place the Conduit as a whole, really. The gameplay isn't going to blow anyone away, but it's very solid for the most part, and the plot at least kept me somewhat invested. That's not to mention the presentation, which is more than passable and even impressive in some regards. I've only seen a taste of the Conduit too, but I'm looking forward to diving into it. I hear they improved things quite a bit over the original. It's only a shame the grinder was cancelled. The Wild West Left 4 Dead kind of style looks like it would have been really cool on the Wii. One of these days, if one actually still exists, I would love to play a prototype. What, I can dream, can't I? This has been my review of the Conduit for the Nintendo Wii. I hope you enjoyed it. I've got a live stream Monday at 4:30 p.m., news video next Friday at 6 p.m., and Let's Plays at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. daily. All Eastern Standard Time, but feel free to subscribe and ASE hack that bell icon if you don't want to worry about keeping track of time zones. A like and comment are always appreciated, but I just hope you genuinely enjoyed yourself. Now that is it for now. Thank you so much for tuning in with me. This week's epic freebie until next Thursday is City of Brass, as well as Total War Warhammer, a 2-for-1 special. Capitalize on life, peace out, have a good one, and I will see you next time.